something like if I put a material that looked like bubble wrap on my roof, that this would make the artificial fuel. Is that what this is? Is this like
this
the
is going to be part
stuff?
of the material in the bubble wrap, as you'll see.
You've got a working model.
We have a working model, so we made it work.
Okay.
So that allowed us to get all the pieces together to build a real system. If we don't fix this energy problem in the one chance we have, because carbon dioxide lasts for thousands of years in our atmosphere, the world will never be the same. So we have a compelling clock to get all hands on deck and solve this energy problem in a sustainable way in the one chance that humanity has before nature does whatever it's going to do to us. And I want to be part of that solution.
What is capitalism? Market capitalism. Well, that's the pure form. That's where you trade goods and services. You have a minimal or low civic involvement. The focus is on short-term profit maximization, we found by experience. And while we're at it, let's look at socialism. A lot of people don't really, I think, need to know what socialism is.
Well, they also assume that the only alternative
is one or the other, right. Actually, socialism, for everybody's information, was a word coined by Karl Marx, and it means government ownership of all property and all means of production. I mean, and then, Marx set it up as dictatorship so that the state took charge of all this, it owned all of this, and we all worked for the government. That's what socialism is. But there's something else. And we do this in America, and it's done all over the world. All over the world, and it's called civic capitalism. It's not market capitalism. It's nowhere near socialism. But what it is, it's pooling our economic resources through government to channel investments into the private sector, into private enterprise, for the benefit of all. Now, this is when you get into environment, energy. We want to benefit everybody. We stimulate and raise productivity of target economic and environmental and citizen empowering activities. And this includes environment, energy, health, sanitation, so on.
Education system.
This is what market capitalism doesn't really address. Market capitalism, I want to make a buck, I want to be most effective at that, and that's fine. It works well. But it cannot work by itself. We've just found that out by experience. We also found out by experience that socialism collapses. It fails. And we certainly saw that in the Soviet Union, because they never get to a lack of scarcity of goods and services, and so it just ends up being perpetual dictatorship. So what government can do by channeling these resources for private sector use, for long-term things that our short-term market capitalism doesn't do, it's called supply-side investments for the private sector. This is supply-side economics. It's very important to get involved with this productivity and a longer-range benefit for the good of all, not just the majority, the good of everybody. And Jan, you may want to comment on these curves here of what happened with the stimulus versus what is modeled that would have happened without it.
With the economy as it was, this is the factual, like the very dark curves are what actually happened with the stimulus package that we put in place, this roughly $800 billion of stimulus. And you can see that although we don't have a huge amount of growth, there is some. It's like 1 to 2%, maybe 3% here at the end of 2010 is projected. And the bad thing is you can see that without it, we would be down at roughly 1%. So we're talking about a 2% difference in GDP growth.
200 basis points.
200 basis points, 2% between what we would have, which would be negative for, let's put it this way, you would have a longer recession.
Or deeper.
Or deep, and probably both. If this stimulus package had not been passed and used.
Yes, we didn't have a depression. That's the bottom line, Jan.
Yeah, we didn't. You can look at this, it didn't go down really deep.
And it's not as good as what we wanted. It's not as good as what you and I wanted.
That 2% number that we talked about, 2% of GDP, 2 to 3% of GDP, is the production shortfall that we saw, the difference between what the economy could grow at and where we were. And that could have been made up if we'd spent our $2 trillion roughly instead of
That we
less
recommended,
than 1.
yes. Okay, let's go to the next one. General aid to state governments.
Government, again,
You
we're
made
not.
38%.
Again, we're keeping jobs going. We're
Okay.
keeping firemen and teachers, and who then spend their money. It's very efficient also.
Okay, and then finally, infrastructure spending.
we like
alternative energy
infrastructure.
and all that. You and I really like
like
that
that one a lot.
And you make a 59% profit on the GDP.
Yep.
Looks great. General Motors, for example, was building the electric car, the EV1, that they terminated in the 1990s. They terminated that because they needed $2 billion of additional investment in the program, and they didn't do that. They were looking at short-term profit outlooks. They had uncertainties in the future. They canceled the entire program for $2 billion. This is, again, the case for civic capitalism, where so many countries all over the world partner with the private sector. It's not socialism. It's pooling common resources through government into the private sector.
Yes.
Giving GM that $2 billion. Had that happened, it could well have been that GM would have peppered the world with the EV2 car that would have had more efficiency, would have been way ahead of everybody else. But that didn't happen. So we have the ability, we're talking stimulus here.
Yes.
We have the ability to use civic capital to do things that the private sector is too jittery about because they are too concerned with short-term returns.
That is absolutely correct.
I don't know of any American who doesn't love political freedom. I've never met an American who is not a rebel somehow against government control and who doesn't want political freedom. I haven't met one. We all want that. I think in this show we're very compatible with that. We want to educate, and we can put to work.
We can't get there without this.
We have to have this.
Yeah.
And we can put these elders who are out of work to work to get us through grade school, college, the whole business.
If we do austerity, which is change in government spending, that's this thing on the bottom, this is a percentage. What happens to GDP, which is the vertical line, right? This is no growth, 0, and this is no growth, no spending change. The whole point of this graph is quite simple. You see, this effectively produces a line. You can see that there's this sort of line running here like that. What this says is that we've run the experiment. We know that austerity, large negative numbers, produces negative GDP.
So you get Ireland, Greece, and Estonia,
Yep.
who have actually pursued austerity after the crash, and they're not growing.
They're not.
I've spent the last 5.5 years trying to figure out what we can do to revitalize our downtown Arcadia district and prepare it for the opening of the gold mine. And what we found through meeting with city leaders from Monrovia to Pasadena is 3 things. Number 1, parking. Number 2, zoning. And number 3, promotion.
And I think the zoning commission has come with a solution that I think is good for Arcadia. So yes, I do support the decision from the Arcadia Residential Zoning Commission.
Yeah, this is an example
Yes.
of a little 3D print that we did with PLA plastic, which is a sugar-based plastic that has very low melting point. So it kind of works like wax in the old casting traditional way of doing casts. And we sent this out to Art Bronze in Burbank, and they made us a test. So they grabbed this object, created a mold, and then burned out the plastic and poured in the bronze.
So if I have some kind of part in a vintage piece of equipment that I really love, and maybe this thing is metal or who knows what it is, but you could first 3D print it. Now, how would you do the design of this? I mean, let's say I brought you this part, and it might be a little bit complicated. And how do you transfer that to computer software before you do this process?
You would have to scan it in. So there's such a thing as a 3D scanner, and we have
Yeah.
one at the shop. So you would have to first scan that. Or if you had the original design somewhere in a computer-aided design file, you could take the computer-aided design file and then do that. and then print it. And then you can see here that we're printing layer by layer from the bottom. So something like this is printed from the bottom layer by layer, just like that one is there, until you come up to the top.
So
Okay.
there-
And then you make this and then go to the traditional bronze foundry.
So this is a set of gears, actually like bearings, but it's meant in a way where it won't come out, and it's printed all in one piece. So you could create objects inside of objects pretty easily with 3D printing.